We are starting. Okay. Well, so now as we start with the classical studio, I usually like to give a first lecture which introduces students to ways of thinking and ways of reasoning that may be different, or maybe kind of good, useful to summarize at the beginning. And I mean, what do we do and what do we learn in classical studio, and how we run it, and what are the important points? And there is this usual misunderstanding that there are some secret rules, some principles of classical architecture that one can teach, and then everyone follows the rules, and then it becomes a proper classical, one gets a proper classical building. And those of us who have worked in the field know that that's wrong. There's no such a thing. There's only one principle, and that's the building must be well composed in order to look good. And that's your aim in classical design. Your aim is aesthetics. It doesn't help, for instance, as sometimes people say, oh, but their proportions or their golden section or whatever. It's all fine, but you know, like or how you do classical orders, but it's all fine, but it doesn't really get you very far, because if your building is bad, if it's badly composed, then you can't justify it by saying, okay, now yes, but I used the golden section or whatever. It's a bad excuse. I mean, if building is ugly, then you know, golden section is useless. Also, for instance, people talk about meanings, about symbolism and whatnot, and again, you can't justify the building, an ugly building, by saying yes, but it's meaningful, or meaningfulness does not justify ugliness. Or similar, and even more importantly, meanings or those associations we have with buildings, ideas we associate with architectural shapes and so on, they are of little use in design, because if you have, for instance, people would say, okay, this or that Renaissance architect associated or kind of said that volutes on a Ionic column, they represent women's hair, but so what? You know, like, great number of very different volutes, very different spirals can be said to represent female hair. So what then? You know, like, I mean, how is the knowledge that you want to represent female hair going to lead you to choose the correct geometrical construction of the volute? So meanings do not get you very far in all of these things. What we talk about is, and what's the core of any serious architectural design, and especially in classical architecture, it's visual preference. It's visual formal preference for certain visual formal solutions that you have to follow. And it's you who has to make these decisions. It's in you, and it's on you. Sometimes people ask me, okay, now, but how do I know that this is right solution, that this is the right relationship, that this is... And again, it's like the same as in music, you know, how does a musician know that this is the right pitch and this is wrong pitch, or this is not accurate, or this is out of tune, and so on. It's the same, it's the judgment of shapes. In music, it's the judgment of relationship between tones. Here, it's judgment of relationships between shapes, and it's not only two-dimensional, just the facade, but it has to be three-dimensional, and that's where things get... It's complicated with the facade already, but when you get into 3 dimensions, then it's really, then it gets really hard. Now, what happens typically is that architects, in solving these problems, visual formal problems that are fundamental architectural problems, you encounter similar problems that other architects have encountered for the past thousands and thousands of years. As I said, like architecture is form-giving and not storytelling. No amount of storytelling will help you solve these problems, but they are genuine visual formal problems that you somehow have to deal with. And these architects in the past have also countered them. So in this sense, you try to learn from the past. You don't try to learn merely from good examples or by copying good examples, but also even more, and in the classical studio especially, we learn from that what hasn't worked in the past. When you go and study, for instance, historical buildings in Rome, you don't just go in order to learn you learn certain spatial situations, formal solutions, and then you think about what worked, what didn't work because of this or that. So it's this analytic method, what and why and how you do spatial relationships and forms that teaches you. But it's ultimately your judgment again that has to be followed in order to realize what works, what doesn't work. And what we do in studio massively is it's basically this. You as a tutor, someone who's worked on this for a very long time, you know where it's going to get hard. You know that the student is going to encounter this or that problem with the corner, with the staircase, with different levels, with the position of dome, with the problem of the vault coming into the dome. All of these things, you know they're coming, you know that they will be there, and that's where you guide the student, and that's that's what this studio is about. But ultimate judgment about what's right or wrong is on the student. And you cannot just tell the student this is right or wrong. It's just giving them solution in mathematics, but not teaching them to solve the problem. So it's ultimately the student in mathematics. It's the student who has to go through a certain mental procedure, through certain thoughts in order to solve the problem. And here too, it's about coming to the solution of a visual formal problem, achieving certain visual formal resolution. By working through it, by thinking about it, whereby the tutor is just someone who points out that you're likely to get this difficult or you're likely to get that difficult, and then looking at various historical examples where it worked or it didn't work. The fact that you look at history, the way you look into the past, that you learn from it, is in a way means that classical architecture is a tradition, because you're open to learning from the past. And you're not supposed to choose, okay, now this is where we will look at Palladio, but we will not look at Corbusier. You look wherever you get something useful and something good to learn from. But you also, truth is that this has accumulated certain knowledge. When I say tradition, what does it mean? It means that solutions that were successful, they were adopted further. The theory of classical orders, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, is a perfect example of this concept of tradition, where you had very rough forms in ancient Greek temples that were gradually improved into Hellenistic ones, into Roman ones, taken over by the Renaissance, by Baroque. It's not that some mystical form landed, I don't know when, and in the past, maybe in ancient Greece or in the early Renaissance, and just imposed these orders as the kind of right way of designing. There's no such a force. What happened was that architects over generations and generations were looking at the ornaments other architects applied, improved them a little bit, changed a little bit here, changed a little bit there. These changes, they follow their own judgment. The next generation of architects comes, sees, okay, now this works, this doesn't work, improves a little bit, adopts the older solutions, improves some of them, rejects some solutions that their predecessors made, moves further. And this, in that sense, classical architecture is really a tradition. But there is also another sense of the word tradition in which classical architecture is not, or it's more than that. And this is the argument that goes and says, okay, now we are various regions, various parts of the world have developed their own ways of buildings, their own traditions, and therefore classical architecture is not appropriate for other places that didn't develop. This is what we call classical architecture today. And so this would be argument, okay, now you can't use classical architecture outside maybe a certain realm of Mediterranean and maybe Western Europe, or and that argument it's a parochial argument. When I say parochial, it means that it overlooks that the same shapes were developed actually quite independently, the same systems of shapes, formal solutions, by various regions independently. And that one particularly good example is Mesoamerican architecture, which I remember when I was some decades ago when I was in Teotihuacan in Mexico. So this is maybe 1,000 years before Columbus. So absolutely no contacts with Europe. And then you suddenly realize that compositional, spatial composition, elements of ornaments, even alignment of spaces, even some proto-Doric columns, it all looks shockingly European, like European classicism. And it's not surprising, you know, like we're obviously, but if this happened in Central Asia, then we would say, okay, now these people, they were under influence, or, you know, someone traveled or whatever. But there is no, Mesoamerica is a drastic example because there was no such influence, you know, 1,000 years before Columbus, there was no influence between Europe and the American continent. But still, they designed and built in a very similar way, and that should not be surprising from a certain humanist perspective that sees the things about architecture in terms of genuine, widely shared, universally shared structure of the human mind, of the way how people move through space, how they organize their space, how they experience space, and ultimately one expects also have certain types of aesthetic preferences. So what happens is that it's quite normal that various cultural contexts would actually come up with very similar things. I remember I lived a long time in New Zealand. The marae, which is the community house of New Zealand Maoris, it is essentially a temple in antis of ancient Greeks. It's wooden, but Greeks also started building in wood. So you know, you actually have a human being has certain types of interactions with space, with environment, and you can't escape that. And apparently, also what we gather from this tendency to endorse very similar forms, there is something that's also universal aesthetic preference. But that's the answer to this argument that you cannot build houses, you cannot build classical architecture in areas that didn't have it. Actually, there are no such areas. But also what I'm interested here, and I want to draw your attention to this other side of this argument and I want to talk about this because this is something that we need to get over, is the argument. Consider the argument, for instance, we should not design buildings with domes in Trondheim or in Norway because that's unorsk, that's un-Norwegian. Domes are un-Norwegian, you know, like. And I've been faced with this argument here. What does it mean, actually? Look at the structure of the argument. The structure of the argument is that it doesn't matter whether some formal design solution, architectural solution, way of building, way of designing, and so on is good or bad. It doesn't matter the quality, how good it is for the people here in Trondheim to have a building with a dome. What matters is that whether it's been done in the past, what matters is the identity and not quality. That's really the claim. The claim is that, oh, we've never done it before, so we are not supposed to do it anymore. We are not supposed to do it at all, even if it's good, even if it's very suitable for us or whatever. Obviously, if it's not suitable, you shouldn't do it in the first place. So this is the issue. The issue that, as a classicist, you will face constantly is this issue of identity versus quality. And that's something you have to be aware of. And I want to talk a little bit more about it here now. So this issue can be in the sense of, okay, now we are here in this part of the world, in our little region, we do only wooden buildings, or we just do this, you can't do dome with wood, so you know, like, you're not supposed to do it, or whatever, you know, like. The idea is that it's identity that matters. But don't forget, the identity need not be only regional. You'll have a lot of people will have a lot of architects who choose their, how they say, like a temporal identity. So they say, okay, now we today today, in our modern times, we shouldn't be doing such and such buildings. So in this case, it's not anymore that here in this region we've never done it, so it shouldn't be done. It's again, it's a different thing. It's basically, oh, it's not appropriate, it's not fashionable, it's not for our time. So it's again this famous argument about it's not appropriate for the time. That's also an identitarian argument. It's just that it's an argument about temporal identity and not about spatial identity. And the answer to both of them is, what matters is the quality of architecture. What matters is what looks good. What matters is how spaces are composed. What matters are formal visual solutions and not, you want your buildings to be good. You want the quality and not identity. I think that's the core issue of this discussion. And now what we come to this is that when you judge what's good, when you judge what you're going to design, what kind of design you're going to endorse, when you judge what are you going to choose to build, you have what's needed is your own integrity. You must judge the way you believe things are. You must not be swayed by the group, by peers, by your colleagues who tell you, oh, this is bad. Maybe because you draw better than they and they're envious. Maybe because they're scared themselves to do something nice. Maybe because you're wrong and it's not really nice. But if you don't see it, that it's not nice, that it's not a good architecture, then it's just endorsing your peers' views it doesn't make you a better architect. So we come to this core issue in all of classical design, it's integrity. And it means basically judging independently of the group you belong to. It means basically standing for your own judgment independently of what other people tell you. And that's hard. And you have all encountered this already, because if you've chosen a classical studio, it means that you're prepared to actually stand against a lot of peers who tell you, oh, don't do that, or whatever, So this is the reason why I sent you, this is a much bigger question that I don't want to go much into it, but I have to warn you that this is a much bigger issue that's been a massive discussion in philosophy for the past 50 years, or so let's say since the 1960s. It comes with this what one could call postmodernism and the rise of postmodernism. The article I gave you, the debate between Richard Rorty and John Searle, published in Logos in 1999. I've sent you that copy, and you can download it from the website. It's precisely it's a very good article because it gives you both positions. I'm going just briefly to summarize. You have one view which says that okay, now their beliefs, their sentences, their propositions or whatever, which are true or false, and they are true or false because they somehow correspond to reality. So they have certain conditions of truth or falsity, and then reality is like that or not like that. So that's John Searle's position, and Richard Rorty's position is no. There's no such thing as even world or whatever. There's only how we agree about the things. So if something is true or false, it's not because it corresponds to reality. It's because people agree about this, and it's useful for us to believe that. So that distinction then is really whether you choose to follow your own judgment, your own integrity, or you choose identity and belonging to the group instead of that. And that cuts very deep. It cuts into everything we are doing here. It cuts all the way through your education, and it cuts into, it goes deep into really deciding what you want to do with your life, essentially. So now, for instance, it makes sense to say, okay, now, but look, for instance, I was asked now, a student says, not a student, says, okay, now, can you decide what, like, one thing is you decide to be a modernist or you decide to be a classical architect. It's not, it's again a position of identity. You decide to identify with one or another group and then you kind of design accordingly. No, that's not what you should do. You should follow your judgment. And if you follow your judgment, then you will maybe end up as modernist. I believe you're more likely to end up as a classicist, but that's what I believe. But it's not about imposing on yourself this way or that way or designing. What you really need to is follow your own judgment, follow your own visual judgment, formal judgment, what you believe is right. Because the fact that you've decided to be a classicist or a modernist is a miserable excuse for designing a bad building. And so you have to follow your judgment, and you will not design good building if you don't believe in what you're designing. If you're just trying to imitate others who are designing in a certain way, or you just seek approval from others. That seeking approval is also instead of following your own perspective, your own beliefs, is also something that I get sometimes asked. But people come and say, "But Branko, it doesn't have to be classical to be beautiful," and that's true. But I'm not even interested. What's interesting in that case is why people ask me that, because I often had the impression that the reason why people say this, the reason why people ask me this, is because they want somehow to sit on both chairs. You see, like they want to be able to avoid conflict with their peers that would be necessary if they design the classical building, and that's what they fear. But at the same time, they're aware that there is a problem with modernist design, because we've seen what comes out when you design modernist buildings. So what is really motivates this question is somehow, okay, tell me that how I can still follow my peers' pressures and still design something nice. But if you follow your peers' pressures, you're not interested in beauty. You are interested in pleasing your peers. And that doesn't get you very far in achieving beauty. It's unlikely to get you very far. So this is why in all, and it's not. The real issue is that in that case you're lying to yourself, and that's the biggest sin for architect and for everyone. So this lying to yourself, you have to be aware that sometimes you have to please the peers, otherwise they kill you, or God knows what they do, but sometimes they fire you, but from the office or from the school where you teach or whatever. But so you have sometimes to be flexible. But essentially, all of this, what I'm saying is, all what we are doing is integrity is the first and foremost issue. It's as much as it's aesthetics we want to achieve, and as much as it's we are not into this ideas of saving the world or whatever. We are in this studio. We are concerned with architecture and with beauty. At the same time, you will not achieve that, I believe, without integrity. So that's the main message. There is that story in Ibsen. The difference between some of you may remember you've read Ibsen in high school, when the King of Trolls explains to Peer Gynt the difference between human beings and trolls. And he says, okay, for a human being, the main law is be true to yourself. And for a troll, it's like be enough. And that be enough, it means getting enough relationships, approval, anything that confirms you, endlessly seeking. Whereas a human being seeks to be true to oneself, and that's hard, and mostly you fail, I think. But that's the direction where you want to go. With the troll, it's basically seeking approval of others. And so what I wanted to say here is you can't be a troll and a classical architect.